I'm going to talk to you guys about nutrition. This is a lot of information. I'm going to try to condense it for you. It's very helpful to take nutrition if you ever have an opportunity because it is so much information and it is so important. But basically, nutrition is the process of ingesting food and fluids, digesting them, and then absorbing nutrients from them. So, we'll talk about calories first. Calories are energy. That's what calories are. Calories are not an evil thing. We have to have calories in order to survive. And we derive our calories from three sources, from proteins, carbohydrates, and fats. And we need a combination of all three of those in order to survive. Average men need about 2,500 calories a day, and females need about 2,000. This is going to be different from everyone. It really depends on how fast your metabolism is and how active you are. Some people need more, some people need less, so this is just the average. Proteins are important because they are our building blocks. So, in order to create new cells, new tissue, we need protein. So that becomes really important for somebody if they're sick, if they're trying to heal from a wound. We have to make sure that they're getting enough protein. Carbohydrates, that's our fast burning energy. That's the first thing our body likes to go to when it needs a source of energy, so we burn them quickly. And then fats are our backup energy. So when we don't have any other energy, if there's a period of time we haven't eaten in a while, we're going to start burning that reserve energy, that fat. So none of these things are evil. They just have to be consumed in the proper portions. So, here, see your little... Got a little chart here. About 50% of your calories should be coming from carbs, about 20% from protein, and 30% fat. Depending on what's going on with you, what conditions you might have, this could change, but this is our average person. So in addition to calories, we get vitamins, minerals, and electrolytes from our foods and fluids that we drink. So we need all of those things. Water is going to be the basis that all of this stuff is dissolved in. So we need to be getting about 2,000 to 2,500 milliliters of water or fluid a day. So we should be balancing out our intake and our output. So when we talk about intake, it is everything that is coming in. So it's fluid that we drink, could also be IV fluids, or maybe even if somebody's getting artificial feeding, it could be coming from that too. So we measure anything that's going in if it's measurable. Solid food we can't measure, so I'm not going to measure a steak in milliliters. But if I have a nutritional shake, then I would measure that. Output is anything that can be measured that comes out of us. So that would be urine, diarrhea, vomit, maybe drainage, all of those things that can be measured. A solid stool I can't measure, so I'm not going to count that as milliliters for output. So just think anything that you can measure in a container in milliliters is something that you should be counting in intake and output. So we're going to do some practice some of this stuff in class so that you can get used to it. You should know that 1 ounce contains 30 milliliters. You have to know that in order to do these calculations. So I know a lot of you have taken Math 129 or, clinical math, so you should know that. It's something you'll carry with you for the rest of your career. So the people that we take care of, they're going to have a lot of health conditions going on. So the food that we give them could be harmful to them if we're not giving them the correct thing. It is your responsibility when you're serving somebody a tray to look at it and make sure that it is the right thing for that person. So when you guys get to your clinical sites, you'll figure out what the procedure is there, but in general, in long-term care, residents have a meal ticket that has their name on it, and it has their diet written on it, and it'll have anything that they can't have written on there as well. You have to look at that before you serve them anything to eat or drink. Like I said, it could be detrimental to them if you give them the wrong thing. So there are all different types of diets. We have the most common type that you might see on here. A regular diet means that this person has no restrictions. So basically whatever they eat, their body can regulate it, figure it out, and they'll be okay. Probably most people watching this right now are on a regular diet. You know, your body can adjust and absorb what it needs from the foods that you take in. But it's not going to be like that for everyone that we take care of. So somebody might be on a liquid diet, meaning they can't have anything solid. So this would be somebody that is maybe has a bowel obstruction, or they've just had surgery and they can't tolerate all of that heavy food, so we're just giving them liquids. It's a little bit easier to digest. So generally you'll see two types of diets. You'll see a clear liquid diet, which is anything that I can see through. So, you know, broth, some fruit juices, not all fruit juices, coffee without creamer, water, anything that's see-through is going to be on a clear liquid diet. And this includes anything that becomes liquid at room temperature, so like Jell-O, or at body temperature. So Jell-O could be considered a clear liquid. A full liquid diet is anything that's a liquid. It doesn't have to be see-through. So that could be creamy soups if they're liquid, or coffee with creamer in it is considered a full liquid. So just look at it and use your common sense to figure out if it's clear liquid or full liquid. A diabetic diet, if somebody's on diabetic or carb control diet, then I need to be careful with how many carbohydrates they are taking in. So typically they're on a limited number of carbohydrates, and I don't want to go over that, so I wouldn't give them anything extra. So, you know, if they ask for a soda, they're going to have a diet soda. If they ask for an extra roll, maybe they can't have that. So you need to be very careful as a student when you guys go to your facilities. If people ask for extra things, you have to look at their diet first and make sure that they can have that. If I give somebody who's diabetic a lot of carbohydrates that outside of what they should be getting, it could really increase their blood sugar, which could cause them harm. And I don't want to cause anybody harm. So just pay attention to that. Low sodium diet, that might be for somebody who has got high blood pressure. Remember, sodium holds on to fluid, so I don't want to give somebody a lot of extra salt. They're going to retain fluid, which is then going to increase their pressure because their volume has increased. So no extra salt packets on their tray, maybe not a lot of processed foods because they have a lot of salt in them. So take a look at the tray and determine if you see any of those things, you can go ahead and remove it. Something you need to be aware of is that people that work in the kitchen, sometimes they haven't had the training that you have had. So if somebody gets served the wrong thing, it's not going to be necessarily on them, it'll be on the person who gave them that tray, which is you. Soft or puree diet is for somebody who has a hard time chewing food. So it's like baby food, whatever the other residents are getting, this person will also get, but it's been pureed. So it's easier to chew and swallow. NPO means they should be having nothing by mouth. So they shouldn't have gum, they shouldn't have hard candies, they shouldn't have ice chips, they shouldn't have anything by mouth. That might be for somebody who is having a procedure done, or maybe somebody who can't swallow, right? I don't want them to aspirate, so I'm not going to give them anything. And like I said, there are other types of diets, but these are the most common ones that you will see. So if I do have somebody who can't eat or swallow, I have to give them nutrition somehow. So there are some alternatives. So this picture shows us a few different alternatives. There's PPN, which is goes through a vein, a peripheral vein, and that can give them a little bit of calories, mostly carbohydrates. They're not getting the protein and the fats that they need to survive as a human being, so this is considered short term. Somebody cannot stay on PPN and survive for a long period of time. TPN, they can get a little bit more fats. This goes into that big large arteries, so it can handle more. It's not as abrasive to the veins. So they can get a little bit more, but it's still not enough to survive for a long period of time, so we have to figure something else out. So our long-term solution might be a PEG tube or a G tube, that gastrostomy tube that you see in this picture. An NG tube, nasogastric tube, is a tube that goes through the nose into the stomach. That can also provide some short-term nutrition. I wouldn't want to keep somebody on this for a very long period of time, though, because it's very abrasive in the nose and the sinuses, so I've never seen it for longer than 2 weeks. At that point, we should have figured out what we're going to do for this person long term. So really, the long-term solutions are down here. And the most common one that you're going to see is this gastrostomy tube. But that might be called a PEG tube or G tube. And there's going to be a little tube inside the stomach, comes out, and it's going to sit on the surface of their abdomen. They're going to be getting tube feeding through that by the nurse, or maybe a family member, where they either get bolus feedings with a syringe straight into the stomach, or they'll be hooked up to something that looks like an IV bag. It's important for you guys to know when you go to your clinical site, if somebody's getting feeding actively, that you cannot lay them flat. You have to make sure that their head is raised. They need to be in Fowlers or high Fowlers. And if you do need to lay them flat for any reason, like to do a brief change or bathe them, then that feeding needs to be put on hold. Because if they're actively getting tube feeding while they're laying flat, they're going to aspirate. That's a huge risk factor for somebody that's getting alternative nutrition. So feeding is one of your testable skills for Prometric and for us. So I want you guys to watch the video on feeding so that you understand this. But some things that you need to be aware of: you should always wash your hands and the residents' hands before they eat, even if they're not feeding themselves. Make sure they've gone to the bathrooms. They're not sitting there uncomfortable the whole time. You have to make sure that they're sitting up, not slouched over. You don't want them to choke. Always offer a clothing protector. I do not want to hear you guys call this a bib, okay, because bibs are for babies and we're feeding grown adults right now. So this is a clothing protector, just like we don't call briefs diapers. These are not bibs. You should be sitting at eye level with them and looking at them and talking to them. If somebody has dementia, we already talked about, they might need cues to remind them. You might have to put your hand over their hand to help feed them because they have that apraxia. They've forgotten how to do some things. If somebody is blind, you can refer to the items on their plate, like the face of a clock. So maybe, your mashed potatoes are at 3 o'clock, green beans are at 6 o'clock, and it kind of helps them to figure out where the food is. So don't think that just because somebody is blind that you're automatically going to be feeding them. They can still feed themselves sometimes. So if somebody has trouble swallowing, like if somebody's had a stroke and they have some dysphagia afterwards, they'll typically get a swallow eval done by the speech therapist, and they might get put on thickened liquids. It kind of helps to hold everything together so they don't aspirate when they're swallowing. So I'll have you guys practice this in class, how to thicken different liquids. So basically there's 4 levels of thickness. Thin liquids would be like water, so this is a thin liquid. It's slick, it's not thick at all. A little bit thicker than that would be nectar thick. That is just like nectar. It's thicker than water, but thinner than honey. Honey thick is a little thicker. It's like the consistency of honey if you were to pour honey. And then pudding thick is like pudding. It's very thick, and it has to be on a spoon. If anybody's on thickened liquids of any kind, like nectar, honey, or pudding, they should not have a straw. It's very hard to suck any of this through a straw. You don't want to do that to your resident. And also know that the thickness is going to be what the thickness is at body temperature. So Jell-O, ice cream, those things become thin liquids when they're at body temperature. So you need to know that they cannot have that if they're on a thickened liquid.